If you have a $500,000 RRIF and you take only the minimum withdrawal every year from age 71 to 85, your estate could face a tax bill of more than $200,000, and that number shows up before OAS clawback even enters the picture. Most people hear RRIF minimum and assume it means the safe amount, the number CRA picked to protect you from running out of money too fast. That's true, in a narrow sense. But the same schedule that protects you from spending too quickly also lets the balance keep growing, year after year, until the government eventually forces you to pull out more of it at a higher tax rate later in life. Here is the specific stake. A retiree who follows the minimum path and nothing else can lose $40,000 to $80,000 in extra lifetime tax compared to someone who uses a simple legal withdrawal strategy instead. That gap isn't a guess pulled from a headline. It's the math built into Section 146.3 of the Income Tax Act, the same section that sets your minimum withdrawal percentage every single year you own a RRIF. And here's the part that catches people off guard. The very habit you're using to avoid tax today, taking only the minimum, is the exact thing that creates a much bigger tax bill down the road. I want to walk you through how those numbers actually work, because once you see the shape of it, it's hard to unsee. I remember sitting down with my own RRIF statement last year and realizing the minimum withdrawal barely covered my property tax bill for the year. That's what sent me looking into what playing it safe actually costs over time. If you're a Canadian retiree who wants to keep more of what you spent decades saving instead of quietly handing it to CRA, hit subscribe. Most people never see this trap coming because on paper, the minimum looks like the responsible choice. Picture a retiree with a $500,000 RRIF who does everything by the book. They open the RRIF at 71, take exactly the minimum every single year, never more, and assume that's the disciplined choice. By age 85, that person will have withdrawn roughly $450,000 in total. But because the account keeps growing faster than the minimum drains it, the balance still sitting inside the RRIF at 85 is over $600,000. Read that again. They pulled out $450,000 across 14 years, and the account is worth more than when they started. That's not a lucky outcome. That's the RRIF minimum schedule doing exactly what it was built to do. The part most people miss the first time they hear it is this. If your investments grow around 5% a year and your withdrawal rate starts at 5.28% at age 71, you're only pulling out slightly more than the growth. So the balance barely moves at first. By 80, the required withdrawal climbs to 6.82%. By 85, it's 8.51%. By your late 80s, it's approaching 10%. The percentage keeps climbing because CRA assumes you're spending down a shrinking number of years, so the withdrawal and the taxable income tied to it keeps rising along with it. Every dollar that comes out of a RRIF counts as fully taxable income, the same as a paycheck. So the years when your minimum withdrawal jumps from 6% to 8% to 10% are also the years your tax bracket creeps upward, often stacking on top of CPP OAS and any workplace pension you already receive. If you're the kind of retiree who doesn't need the money and figures leaving it alone is the responsible move, I understand the instinct completely. But that instinct is exactly what sets up the forced spike you won't be able to control later. The invisible cost isn't what you pay today. It's the decade starting around 85, when the withdrawal percentage and the account balance are both large at the same time, and CRA collects tax on the whole thing whether you actually need that cash that year or not. An analysis from Art of Retirement lays this out clearly. A retiree who uses a structured withdrawal strategy between ages 62 and 71, instead of waiting for the mandatory minimum to take over, can reasonably cut their lifetime tax bill by $40,000 to $80,000. That range matters because it's the gap between doing nothing and doing something small but deliberate before the rules take the decision out of your hands. Think about what that gap means in real terms. It's the difference between covering a decade of property tax bills out of your own plan on your own schedule, or handing that same amount to CRA in one lump sum the year your estate settles. It helps to see why the balance keeps climbing in the first place. A diversified RRIF holding a mix of equities and fixed income has historically grown somewhere near 5% a year over long stretches. In the early years after 71, your minimum withdrawal sits just above that growth rate, so you're taking out slightly more than the account earns, and the balance edges down only a little. That's the entire design. The schedule was never meant to drain the account quickly. It was meant to stretch withdrawals across your expected lifespan while the government waits patiently for the balance, and the tax owing on it to grow large enough to matter. There's a knock-on effect, too, that rarely gets mentioned. A larger RRIF balance at death doesn't just mean a larger tax bill on the final return. It can also push your estate into probate delays and higher administration costs on top of the tax itself at a time your family is already dealing with enough. But here's where it gets interesting, and where most people get stuck. You might be thinking, CRA doesn't love or hate anything. This whole framing is just a scare tactic to get clicks. And you'd be right that CRA as an agency doesn't have feelings about your RRIF balance. But the Income Tax Act absolutely has a structure, and that structure rewards patience from the government side, not yours. Let me show you the exact rule that proves this isn't a guess. I know some of you are skeptical of the whole premise here. The title sounds like clickbait. CRA loves it when you take the minimum, as if CRA sits around rooting for your withdrawal to stay small. The plain version is this. Section 146.3 of the Income Tax Act sets the RRIF minimum withdrawal rules, and the recovery tax provision in the Old Age Security Act claws back OAS once your income crosses a set threshold. Neither of those is an opinion. They're documented, public rules that apply to every RRIF holder in the country. The trap isn't that CRA feels anything about your minimum withdrawal. It's that the tax code is built to collect more from you if you simply let time pass and do nothing. The approach I'm about to walk through just uses those same rules in your favor instead of against you. It's sometimes called the RRSP meltdown strategy, and the mechanics are simpler than the name makes it sound. Step 1. Between age 60 and 71, before RRIF minimums apply at all, you withdraw more than you strictly need from your RRSP, enough to fill up your lower tax brackets without pushing into a much higher one. Step 2. You take the after-tax proceeds and move them into your TFSA, where the room resets every January 1, so any contribution space you use one year comes back the next. Step 3. You defer CPP and OAS as long as it makes sense for your situation, up to age 70, where CPP payments run 42% higher than if you'd started collecting at 65. Step 4. By the time RRIF minimums begin, your RRSP balance is meaningfully smaller than it would have been, which means the forced withdrawals later are smaller too, and they stack less aggressively on top of CPP and OAS. None of these 4 steps require a lump sum decision or a dramatic change in lifestyle. Each one is a small, repeatable choice you make every year between 60 and 71, the same kind of routine decision as reviewing a mortgage renewal or a car insurance bill, just applied to your retirement account instead. Let's put a number on it. Say you're 65, sitting on a $600,000 RRSP, and each year from 65 to 70, you withdraw an extra $30,000 beyond what you'd normally take. At a 30% marginal tax rate, that costs you $9,000 a year in tax, leaving $21,000 to move into your TFSA. Over 6 years, that's $126,000 shifted into an account where growth is never taxed again. By 71, Your RRIF balance is roughly $100,000 lower than it would have been under the do-nothing approach. A lower balance means a smaller mandatory withdrawal, less risk of tripping the OAS clawback, and a smaller tax bill for whoever inherits what's left. I used to think taking the minimum was the safe, disciplined choice, full stop. I was wrong about that. When I actually ran the numbers for my own situation, I realized I was leaving something close to $50,000 on the table over my lifetime, simply by defaulting to the smallest withdrawal every year without questioning it. That's what changed how I approach my own account. But I know what a lot of you are thinking right now. I don't need the extra money, so why would I withdraw more than the minimum and pay tax on it sooner than I have to? That's the single most common reason people never act on this, and it deserves a real answer instead of a quick brush past. The I don't need the money mindset makes complete sense on the surface. You spent decades building this account, and now the instinct is to protect it, not touch it. But the shift in thinking that actually matters is this. A RRIF isn't a savings account you own outright. It's a tax-deferred account, which means a portion of every dollar sitting in there already belongs to CRA, whether you've withdrawn it or not. Leaving the account alone doesn't protect your money. It just lets CRA's share keep growing tax-free right alongside yours. And they collect their piece later, with the account bigger and your bracket often higher than it needed to be. I get why it feels wrong to pull out money you don't plan to spend. But think of it differently. You're not spending that money at all. You're moving it from a taxable box to a tax-free box. Same dollars, same ownership, just a better location for them to sit and grow. A lot of you have said the OAS clawback is what stops you cold, and that's a fair concern to have. The 2026 threshold sits at $95,323 in net income. For every dollar above that line, you repay 15 cents of your OAS. So, say you withdraw an extra $20,000 in a year and it pushes your income $10,000 past the threshold. That costs you $1,500 in clawed back OAS for the year. But that same $20,000, once it's sitting inside your TFSA, keeps growing completely tax-free from that point on. Over 10 years, at a modest 5% return, that's roughly $12,500 in extra tax-free growth, well ahead of the $1,500 you gave up that 1 year to get it there. Run the comparison honestly, and the clawback stings a lot less than it sounds like it should. What if your TFSA is already full? The 2026 annual limit is $7,000, and for anyone who's never contributed since the account launched in 2009, total lifetime room now sits at $109,000. If you've used all of it, you still have options. A non-registered account holding Canadian dividend-paying investments gets preferential tax treatment on those dividends. Paying down a mortgage, if you still carry one, is a guaranteed after-tax return equal to your interest rate. Gifting to children or grandchildren while you're alive can shrink the size of your estate and let you watch them actually benefit from it. Or, plainly, spending on something you've been putting off, because none of this comes with you. There's one more scenario worth naming, honestly. What happens if markets drop the same year you decide to withdraw more than the minimum? Say you pull an extra $30,000 in a year, your RRIF is down 10%. You're locking in a loss on paper in that moment. The way around this is to draw the extra amount from the cash or fixed income portion of your RRIF, not from the equities that happen to be down, and to plan the timing a year or two ahead rather than reacting in the moment it happens. I'll admit, when I first came across this strategy, it felt like a lot of moving pieces at once: tax brackets, TFSA room, OAS thresholds, all shifting together. But once I ran the actual numbers for my own account, the decision got a lot clearer than I expected. You don't need to do all of it in 1 year. Start with one extra withdrawal, see how the tax return looks, and adjust from there based on what you actually see. One more group I haven't addressed here: people still working past 70 with a high income. That's a different playbook entirely, and it deserves its own conversation rather than a rushed mention squeezed in here. For now, let's bring this back to what matters most for the majority of you watching. So here's the framework, reduced to its simplest form. Don't rely on the RRIF minimum by itself. Between 60 and 71, withdraw enough from your RRSP to fill your lower tax brackets. Not just whatever the minimum happens to be once your RRIF eventually opens. Move what's left after tax into your TFSA or into one of the alternatives if your room is already used up completely. Defer CPP and OAS as long as it reasonably fits your situation, so your guaranteed income later in life is as high as it can be. By the time you reach 72, your RRIF balance will be smaller. Your mandatory withdrawals will be easier to absorb without spiking your tax bracket. And whoever inherits the account will face a noticeably smaller bill than they would have otherwise. None of these 4 steps depend on predicting the market or timing anything perfectly. They depend on doing something small and deliberate every year instead of defaulting to the smallest number CRA allows, which is the easiest habit to fall into precisely because it feels cautious. You don't have to execute any of this perfectly. Even one deliberate year of withdrawing above the minimum, timed reasonably well, can save you thousands over the years that follow. The real window is the stretch between 60 and 71. Once RRIF minimums lock in, your flexibility narrows considerably, because the withdrawal schedule is set for you at that point, instead of chosen by you. None of this requires trusting that CRA is somehow on your side. It only requires understanding that the rules are public, they're consistent, and they reward the retiree who acts a little earlier over the one who waits for the minimum to make every decision on their behalf. Think back to that $500,000 RRIF and the $200,000 tax bill sitting at the far end of the minimum-only path. That number isn't fixed. It moves depending on what you do between now and 71, and most of that movement is still available to you. If you'd rather your family keep more of what you spent decades building, instead of watching a large chunk of it disappear into a tax bill the year you pass it on, hit subscribe now. The choice between the minimum path and a deliberate one is entirely yours, and it stays open for as long as you're between 60 and 71. Thanks for watching. The math is already on your side. You just have to be the one who actually uses it.